Actually, this topic has a bunch of structural constraints for me, which I will start with. Um, when you have a target that is a $1 trillion economy, you have a lot of variables that are not in your control, at least from a mathematical perspective. We don't know what the FX rate is going to be by 2030. We don't know what the global economy is going to do, and much as we'd like to think, and I have emphasized in the House that we have hedged our position in such a way that Tamil Nadu will be more resilient than most. That doesn't mean we'll be completely insulated. So were the global economy to go into a recession as some fear, then obviously that has some impact on our ability to reach this target. In fact, it's also not clear because we haven't had a census in 2021 and there's no sign of the census starting again, though we're in 2023. We don't even know what the population trajectory of Tamil Nadu really is. The last data we have is from 2011, and after that we have been using other cross references. We take the ration card database, or we take the voter database, or we take the birth registrations and therefore the TFR, and we start to kind of derive what we think the population is. But if our population trajectory is down as we think, which is because of a total fertility rate of only 1.6, then that's going to have a significant impact when you talk about the gross number. I'd actually go one step further. About a month or so ago, I got additional responsibility for the Economics and Statistics Department, which is the key kind of agency or the nodal agency for a lot of the calculations. And though it doesn't seem like it, a lot of things that are Government of India programs or schemes or data or vision actually get generated by the states, by the local bodies, so forth. So for example, though the Election Commission of India is an entity, in fact when elections are run, 95% of the people staffing the election are state employees, starting from IAS officer who's the election commissioner of the state. Every district collector becomes the district election officer, and so on, down to school teachers who become the booth, kind of execution people. So in that sense, the Economics and Statistics Department of Tamil Nadu and those like it in the other 30 states are actually key contributors to the overall, the gross data that we see published by the Government of India. I already had some concerns about the quality of that data and some of the calculations. These were validated when some internal discussions happened about the way the state borrowing limits are set and how the union government, Union Finance Ministry calculates certain things. After having taken over the department, I'm even more concerned. I'm not saying that the numbers are bad, I'm just saying the practices are dated, and I think we should really be fundamentally re-examining them. And if that's true for Tamil Nadu, that's also true for most other places. So it's possible we are actually noticeably underestimating the actual economic activity. I say all this because I say at some level, though it is a very clear target and one that we can all coalesce around, the quantitative outcomes are in many ways not 100% or not even substantially in our control because of all these variables that we can't fathom. And therefore I think really we should think of this more in directional things and more in kind of input. What kind of input gives you what kind of output? So I saw the paper from the Madras School of Economics, former Governor C. Rangarajan and his associate. It had some issues, but those are not that relevant again. The quantitative basis of a lot of things is a bit shaky. Qualitatively, I'm very happy to see that in this event, we are starting to break down the components or the factors that go into driving the economy. Because really, you could have abstract goals or quantitative goals, and unless you know which steps lead you in which direction at what pace, it's very difficult to know whether you'll reach the destination or not. So the government of Tamil Nadu, for example, has already issued a tender, and I think it has been decided, though it's not been released, about who will be our knowledge partner in coming up with a more concrete, both in terms of factors, but also in terms of specific industries at specific parts of the cycle. For example, when we are in the sweet spot of a big transition away from China in terms of manufacturing and logistics and supply chains, and also from Hong Kong in terms of financial services, which is very meaningful for Tamil Nadu because we have an oversized share of the financial services ecosystem, even within the kind of IT and fintech space. And also the economy still seems to be going okay, though the rates are much higher than they used to be a year and a half ago. Somehow the bond markets and the stock markets haven't fully kind of collapsed. In fact, the bond markets are suggesting that maybe inflation will be controlled and maybe there will be a soft landing after all without seeing extreme outcomes. But markets are only estimators, so we have evidences of multiple dramatic crashes over the last century to know that the market is not always got that kind of 2020 foresight. In the factors, the industries, the locations, the sectors, I think this breakdown is a particularly good one in terms of from the policy level, and by policy that includes in a substantive way the government's policies, at least the fiscal policies, the monetary policies not set by us, by the Reserve Bank, and that's a pan-India thing, but the fiscal policy is significantly determined at the state level. I'll come back to that in a minute. I think infrastructure and logistics, as I've said many, many times before, in an ideal world, what we see as a borrowing limit, if we were in compliance with the FRBM Act, or the equivalent for us is the FRA Act, of 0% revenue deficit or zero revenue deficit and 3% under normal circumstances fiscal deficit, then that 3% is not just a ceiling, but in my opinion, in a responsible government, it should be close to the floor as well, meaning we should aim as aggressively as possible for that 3% borrowing for capital investment. Because whenever you have the state borrowing, you get many advantages. The first is that it will be the lowest cost funds relative to most corporates or other entities. The second is that the likelihood of execution without hiccups, without red tape is much higher when the government itself is the execution agent as opposed to private enterprise. The third is that the government normally does projects that have huge multipliers, because we do roads and bridges and ports and airports and hospitals and drinking water systems, which can increase either trade or productivity or access significantly, and therefore will have much greater multiplier effects on the economy. And so if you get the lowest borrowing with the highest likelihood of execution and the highest likely multiplier, then it's the responsibility of the government to find those kinds of investments and make them as much as they can within the debt ceiling. There are some issues, I'll come back to that. Credit is of course key. As I personally attend every quarterly state level bankers committee meeting since I became finance minister, I re-emphasize all the time that without the flow of credit, especially in a country like India, where there is not too many efficient sources of financing. You take a developed economy like the US or Europe, you'll find the debt markets are higher valuation in most cases than the equity markets, because there's a natural need for debt markets. All those who are trying to move money forward and back in time, the insurance companies, the pension funds, the actuarial investors will all be trying to get relatively guaranteed returns in the debt market. So you'll have a fixed income model that is a huge funder. So if you look at the US, for example, 85% of all debt will come from the markets, and only 10 or 15% will come from the banks. That is non-domestic, non-mortgage debt. In India, that's not true. In India, it's probably the reverse. Even at state financing, states like Tamil Nadu have significant access to the market, and probably 85% of our borrowings come through the market, even if they're state development loans or other bonds. But if you take states that don't have such good credit ratings, most of their money comes through the banks. So credit in India is mostly bank driven, but the development of markets and the facilitation of bank credit, especially as here listed in green finance, for example, Government of Tamil Nadu has announced under the TNIFMC, which I chair, the alternate fund manager, that we'll issue a green fund, and it's being received well. Labor is the key. Average productivity of your workforce is probably the single determiner of your relative position in the global economy. These days, capital is quite fluid. These days, the trade avenues are relatively unrestricted. And so if there's one factor within your control, then clearly that is the average productivity. And the Chief Minister has made it his priority through non-Mudalvan and similar schemes, and we're seeing some great improvement in the short term. Optimizing procurement and inputs, I would start with the government first. I think we are introducing e-tenders, full e-tenders starting April 1st. That was an announcement in last year's budget. I think the processes could withstand a lot of improvement. That is at the government level. At the corporate level, the tiering of OEMs and so forth, and the strategy to fit those components in will be crucial. So that's another very important factor. And then, of course, the emerging sectors and the innovation. As you may have seen, I think last Friday, the Chief Minister issued the first few venture investments out of our Tamil Nadu Emerging Sector Seed Fund, another fund run under the TNIFMC, where we're raising capital externally and taking equity partnerships. So I'm very happy. I think these have been well chosen. I'm sure very important aspects will be highlighted, and through the discussion, some clear consensus and insight will evolve. I'll just say about the first two topics, which I earmarked to come back to. I think the infrastructure and logistics, actually I'll start with the other first. Let's start with the fiscal policy and the government's kind of own balance sheet and fisc. It's unfortunate that a state like Tamil Nadu, which had brilliant progress, the FRA was enacted in 2003. It is not coincidental that the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions, which has happened all over the world, also happened in India at the union government and in most states, in fact all states, in 2003. Because it's simply impossible to meet the conditions of the FRA of Tamil Nadu or the FRBM Act of India if you have unlimited future liabilities with unreliable markets where you can get an actuarial basis for providing defined benefit pensions. That's true in America, that's true in Europe, that's true in most countries, that's true in India, that's true in Tamil Nadu. So the twin moves of going to an FRBM equivalent constraint, zero revenue deficit and 3% fiscal deficit, and then a few other conditions, and moving to a defined benefit, from a defined benefit to a defined contribution pension system, greatly improved the finances of Tamil Nadu, greatly. And that is to say, we went from somewhere around 27-28% debt to GDP in 2003 when the Act was put in place, adopted, and by 2014 that had come down to 17 or 16.5 or 17.5%. Huge, dramatic improvement in the debt to GDP ratio. Growth was good, debt taking was small. Same way, if you look at interest to revenues, We used to be 20, 22, 23% of our total revenues went to interest payments in 2003. By 2014, that came down to 11, 11.5%, almost half. This was done apart from politics. That is to say, from 2003 to 2006 was the ADMK government. From 2006 to 2011 was the DMK government. From 2011 to 2014 was the ADMK government under Ms. Jayalalitha. But after 2014, we had a serious problem. For very many variables, starting with, in my opinion, the lack of steady leadership because of Ms. Jayalalitha's own legal and then health problems and then her demise. From 14 to 21, almost all the upside of 3 to 14 has been unwound. By the time we came to office, and this was exacerbated by 1 year of COVID, but it was already done significantly by 20. That is to say, the interest to revenue ratio was back up around 18, 19, 20%, and the debt to GDP was back up around 27, 28%. Now, the real loss of this was a complete slowdown or almost kind of decimation of infrastructure and capital spending. Right? We used to spend, between 2006 and 11, we used to spend about 2.6, 2.8% of GSDP on capital expenditures. 11 to 14 came down 2.5, 2.6. There's some mathematical issues with the union government. That's a different reason. But we're not able to hit the 3% because of the way they set these targets. But 2.6, 2.8, 2.9 is one thing. By the time we entered into COVID, we were barely spending 1.25%, 1.4%. And we went into COVID, and by the time we came out, we were barely spending 1% of GSDP on capital investment, and the kind of capital investment that the state makes, which is roads and bridges and ports and drinking water systems and schools and hospitals and all that stuff. So that really took its toll. The first toll, which all the economic books tell you and which the RBI says, is that it slowed our growth rate because we were not putting in infrastructure, we were not putting in productivity enhancement, we were not investing capital. But what it also did, a second order effect, was it made our interest to revenue go up a lot because we were still borrowing at or above the limits, and we were using those all to fund revenue deficits. And so, we ended up having interest payments soar. And then there was a third order effect, which I didn't really realize till I came to office, which is that the capacity to build infrastructure, the capacity to do capital project execution has deteriorated. I suppose it's a natural outcome. If the state cuts down its investment from 3% or 2.8% to 1%, surely businesses are not sitting around waiting for the day it will invest. So in the same time, the government of India actually, because its shift, as is very clear mathematically, again I'm not talking politics, they shifted a lot away from social sector spending towards infrastructure spending. And so there was a lot of demand from union government spending to go into infrastructure. And so a lot of this capacity, this building capacity, the execution capacity has shifted focus, and we don't really have the capacity to execute. So both last year and this year, though the final numbers are not out, we showed the interim review, which the FRA Act requires me to do as finance minister. I did that and presented it to the House earlier this month, where we are just not on pace to spend as much in the capital investments as we would like. Last year also we missed the target a little bit. The pace this year suggests we'll also miss this year's target a little bit. Part of that is that we don't have the execution ability. So that's the 2 points I want to say. And why I say that is, therefore, there is a big need for us to start looking at PPP, BOT, HAM. We got to look at ways of building that get private enterprises with skin in the game, with execution skill, with capacity, with engineering expertise. And that is the only way we can scale up. We are reducing the fiscal problem significantly, right? Last year we brought the revenue deficit down 16,000 crores and the fiscal deficit down by about 1.6% of GDP. That's a remarkable achievement, I think, never seen before. This year we'll improve on that, at least if the trends that we presented to the House continue. But as fast as the fisc is being repaired, we are not able to do the second, third order benefits. We're getting some of the benefits of reduction in interest payments because we're not borrowing as much, but we're not getting the benefits of being able to deploy that capital as rapidly as we'd like. And we simply need to look at new ways to deploy that capital and accelerate growth. But, you know, at the end, there's only so much any government can do in terms of the economy. We can provide the right environment, we can have good policies, we can develop the talent, we can have a business-friendly and a kind of ease of doing business transparent platform. After that, it really comes down to private enterprise, starting with MSMEs, which are the biggest job creators, to the large global companies that bring second order, third order benefits, even though they may not do direct employment relative to the capital investment, but because they exist, they create ecosystems of excellence, of expertise, and then we get many other benefits. So I hope this discussion or set of discussions today will prove very helpful to you, to us, to the people of Tamil Nadu. We have many different perspectives coming in. How do we get to the Chief Minister's goal? I think all of them will add value in some way. Some will be more easily executable, some are more practical, some are within the private sector. But as a government, we are very keen on partnerships. In a democracy, you know, we all have to work together to achieve an outcome and do it through consensus. So events like this and the insights and the consensus that emerges through such discussions are very important. And so I'm appreciative of the chamber. I'm appreciative of all the individuals who have put in their effort, the sponsors, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.